I needed intellectual tools for doing semantization of my work as historian. And this is also what I would like to share with you today. I went back also to some lectures I had at university myself when I was a student in epistemology, and this provided me at that then with a couple of intellectual tools that then I never used afterwards up to now, but I came back to them. And so I'm happy I can share with you some ideas, and thank you very much for inviting me. You see the topic, what's about sharing with you some aspects of the common work with George. You will see more about this during the contribution on the paper. And in the chat, I put two links to a workshop that we have in Lyon. It's everything at the moment in French, but we are thinking about changing this and enlarging if interested people would like to join, and apparently it is so. And also Vincent à la Mercerie, I think he's also here. I do not see, because I do not see everyone, but I think he's also here. So thank you also to Vincent, who is participating in this very nice road trip that we have. And also the second link is the bibliography of a talk similar to this one, not so advanced in the conceptualization as this one I will share with you. A couple of months ago, so you will find some references there that I quote here. And last point is I'm starting from the project I'm coming from very shortly in order to express the needs and show to you from which perspective I'm speaking. So in this SYMOGIH project, which in French was called Système modulaire de gestion de l'information historique, not very relevant, and we tried to have a collaborative virtual research environment. And if you do this and you want to share your data, the data researchers produce, of course, you know, we live now in this wonderful vision of the semantic web, so we need different things. One thing is to connect our resources, to interlink the data. And for this, as we all know, we have authority files and we have Wikidata and different kinds of reference tools to interlink data. That's done in many projects, but the very relevant point that I would to address today is the one of conceptualizing the information we are storing or sharing. And we tried in SYMOGIH with a kind of generic model involving objects and information in knowledge units, roles, and having patterns, modeling patterns. And we developed around or some more of 150 patterns. One pattern here presented is teaching, how you model the teaching at university of someone. But these patterns are not very consistent. We needed more to make them consistent. I'll come back to this point. And this is needed, the whole vision that I'm presenting today, of course, if you want to go really into these FAIR principles and reuse data produced by other people. You have to understand them. So as the FAIR principles state, one of the very relevant point is to share knowledge representation, or I would more precisely say today in my use of language, information representation. So you need to share the conceptualization in order to be able to reuse existing data. As we know, as we'll see afterwards, if you do this, you need first to understand what you are modeling. What are you modeling? What would you like to model? And you have to define the scope and the focus of your domain of discourse or domain of interest. So, in my opinion, there is a very relevant distinction that we have to make between factual information in history, like Galileo being teaching in Padua during 20 years, more or less, and the reason why he was condemned. To state the reason why Galileo was condemned in 1633 is quite complex, and this is about knowledge. the fact that he was teaching there is what they call historical information. And that information is not knowledge becomes quite clear if, on the one side, you take the quite classical pyramid in information science and read it in the sense of the historical method. You know that there is no research in history without a research agenda. This is on the right. That you have a huge amount of sources, but they do not speak these sources if you do not ask them. So you first have to have questions. Out of these questions, you produce information. And out of this information, using different methods, you produce knowledge, which is your own conclusion about the questions. Another very important point is that when we model data in history, one thing is modeling what is in the sources, like taking TI and annotating mentions of things in the sources. And for this, we can use ontologies like the factoid ontology developed in London in prosopographical projects there. This is the level of what the sources say. But we can also model what researchers say in the sense of factual information after applying historical criticism to sources. This is not the same epistemological level. So what we modeled, this is my point in SYMOGIH, is historical factual information. The fact that Galileo was teaching there at that time, not the mention in the sources, which is a different level. And more generally speaking, and without commenting the whole slide, we must be aware that when we model historical data, we model quite different things. We model the sources, taking archival reference ontologies or Ferber or whatever. We model factoids, we model factual information, we can model knowledge even. This is the central part, blue. But we model also the way we produce this information. For instance, in CRM, we have the attribute assignment or measurement class, which are classes modeling the way you produce information. Or we can model how you produce knowledge, how you model in the sense of data analysis, how you gather together or analyze your information and why you have some conclusions. And for this, you could use, for instance, the provenance ontology, if you're interested in. So we are not modeling the same thing. And in one ontology, you can find different parts of the model. I'm speaking here about modeling historical information, factual information. Galilei taught in Padua from then to then. So if you take even this simple sense and you say, okay, in the sense of the fair data challenge, I would like to take the factual information which is in this sentence out of that and produce data, you will see, if you read the slide, even yourself afterwards, because I cannot go, of course, in the detail, that there are at least 4 different factual informations that you have in there. It's not, information comes not out of sources itself. You have to grab it out. And this is done in your brain. You have a question, you go to the text, you find what you're interested in, you take it out and you model it. And another researcher can do the same from another perspective and takes out another piece of information. This is one big issue. The second big issue that we encounter every time we model with colleagues, and I have now around a 15 years modeling experience, is that we start often with a modeling which is not very suitable. For instance, like this. A professor is citizen of a country, a merchant is citizen of a country, not very robust, yes? So first of all, you have to go up in the abstraction and see that a professor and a merchant is in fact a person and is citizen of a country, okay? And also that a person has a social role, which can be professor or merchant. Then, if you take another example, you see that a person is born in a town, a dog is born in a village, so you would put person and dog in the class of animals being born, yes, mammals. And if you do this, you are modeling here biological phenomena. And on the top, you have something else, which is not in biology. And my dog does not see what you see on the top. That me, I am a researcher at CNRS, my dog doesn't know it. So these are two different levels, two different domains of discourse. So when we see all this, we have to ask ourselves how to cope with this. We have to model different domains of discourse or of interest. And I didn't know this 15 years ago when we started with the SYMOGIH project. I know it now. We have foundational ontologies which help us to think, to consider all this. And first, what is an ontology? There are at least four relevant aspects in an ontology. Formality, the need of having formal semantics. It's a formal specification of what? Of a consensus about a conceptualization, of a shared conceptualization. So it's about conceptualizing things, but also about sharing this conceptualization. Many projects develop their own model. These are conceptualizations, but insofar as they are not shared by a community, they are not ontologies. They are local dialects. And in the end, you have to be well aware of the domain of interest that you're modeling, or domain of discourse. That's why my point, the second one. So, first, the relevant domain. Here, now, today, not in general, but now, I would like to model historical knowledge production with this very relevant distinction we made. So the focus is on modeling factual information. Now, if you take foundational ontologies, they try to conceptualize domain of discourses. And the one you can take, if you like, is Dolce, which was developed to model a domain of discourse which is quite general. It's the discourse about particulars in general. And it's foundational in the sense that it provides a conceptualization of the high-level categories in which we speak, generally speaking. So you have endurance, which are persons, stones, dogs, and so on. You have the events, the perdurance, the time in which they live, the time and the space. You have the qualities of all this, which is time for a perdurant, space for an endurant, and so on and so forth. And then you have the word of the abstracts, which is geometry. And so the basic idea in Dolce is that endurance, dogs, people, live and participate in perdurance, which are the time spans in the flow of the things in the world. But this is not the only one ontology that the WonderWeb project produced, Dolce. The second one, which is, in my opinion, even more relevant for us historians, in description and situations, stemming from the same European project, WonderWeb. The philosophical foundation of this ontology is to state that there is a flux in life, which is everything happening as it is there, and it is a logos, ourselves speaking about this flux. And the flux, you can call it also state of affairs, things that are there in time and space. And logos is our way of speaking about this. There is a connection, of course. We are not nominalists, we are realists. But we know in the modern time, post-Kantian time, that we do not speak directly about things as they are. We speak about things as they are, but in our language. So the basic classes stemming from this way of seeing things are situation and description. Descriptions are conceptualizations that we as groups of humans apply to state of affairs, and we see their situations, but we see their, like in the example of Galilei I gave, because we are interested in them. So in the same sentence that you read, Galilei was at Padua and so on, from different points of view, which are these descriptions, you see different situations. Galilei teaching actively, Galilei being a member of the university, Galilei having a status, Galilei earning money, and so on and so forth. And situations satisfy descriptions. So if you apply this to society, we can say that descriptions are what exists in collective intentionality. We believe that there are states, and these states have laws and rules, and we accept or not these rules. And what happens in life, the social entities, the social roles, being president, being CNRS researcher, the collectives, the memberships in them, having a house, and everyone believes that this is your house, and so on. These are situations in the world which correspond to collective intentionality. This is the basic assertion by description and situation ontology. So if you apply this to our example, you can say that Dolce models the physical biological world and social life, but in this biological sense, and description and situation model social phenomena. And therefore, they have the whole conceptualization of this, that they cannot develop and present this here. But the basic idea is that you have state of affairs in the world, which are transformed into situations, which are perspectives on them, according to different descriptions. And this is also very important for social sciences. Because in social sciences, we are studying and considering what people think now in our society, if we are sociologists or social psychologists, or in the past. So we have societies which we are studying, societies under consideration, but we are also intentional intentional, yes? And so we have a known conceptualization, and we must be aware that there is a dialogue or a kind of tension on the one side, and in the historian's point of view, the critical distance is very important, yes? That we model what people thought then, not what we think that is, yes? When we produce classes, we have to produce classes and instances according, in the social domain, according to what people thought then, not what we think. There is a distance there. And also, I will not discuss this slide today, but it is very important because you do not model out of an epistemic approach. This does not exist. Because you model reality, you model things, you model state of affairs. But in science, scientific objects, these were my epistemology classes 30 years ago. In science, scientific objects are not things. Scientific objects are your way of modeling things through experiments, especially. So this said, foundational ontologies are very strong, robust for thinking about things, but we need domain ontologies. And as probably all people present today know, a good idea is to use the CIDOC CRM as a domain ontology. And then the issue is, how can you model factual information, factual historic information about societies there? So the CIDOC CRM, as you all know, has some general views about the way of modeling things, which are very interesting, robust, relevant. And also, second point, the domain of discourse is cultural heritage, interoperability of data stemming from different cultural heritage repositories. For this, it was thought and developed. And with a classical slide that it showed in trainings. Sorry for the things on the right which are not relevant. You have all the documents and dimensions, and then you have the information you take out of it, and then you have the aggregation in the high-level vision of this. And if you go back to this distinction that I presented to you, factoids as the discourse of the sources and factual information as what we historians take out of it, there are these two levels which are clearly distinguished in the CRM. And the integration happens through all the repositories at the higher level. But, there is a but also, you have to ask yourselves if the epistemology and the way of modeling is suitable for doing everything, or if it is not more related to the domain of discourse of the CRM, the original one, which is, if you think about all what I said up to now, quite evident. You do not apply approaches different than the ones that you need. So, if you read this paper, which is the bibliography you find on the links that I provided you, and you come to these considerations, as an historian, the problem that you have is in the last sentence, because you probably cannot apply this method to social life, which is the core of the domain of discourse of history. So how to cope with this? Because the big question is, of course, the CIDOC CRM models wonderfully physical biological phenomena. Of course, there are also some classes modeling some social phenomena in the CIDOC CRM, like becoming member of a group. But what I showed to you is that not a different domain of discourse, in fact, social life. And as I showed to you, if you take Dolce and descriptions and situation, you take not one ontology, you take two ontologies, and you put them together, and you have Dolce Light Plus. So, if we, instead of Dolce, we take the CIDOC CRM, what can we add on the top of that? Of course, we can add on the top of that descriptions and situations. This already works, because description and situations in the WonderWeb project was thought to do this. But this is very general. You have to have a specific focus. And for this, with George together and other people, we are trying to add an extension which is based on collective intentionality. Because we need, not necessarily in the sense, of course, of description of the situation, but just to illustrate the idea that we had to add another layer for another domain of discourse. And the first one, of course, is the foundation, because we live in the world. We are also biological entities, ourselves, as humans. But living in space and walking, my dog does it. But the social life, he does not see it, the human social life. He sees the social life of dogs, of course. So that's why we are trying, with some colleagues, George, to develop a conceptualization for social phenomena. Where can we merge the two things? And what I'm saying now is not this perspective in CRM Social, but it's my own perspective, as I will show, out of the historical research. It's my contribution, yeah? So the only responsible for what I'm saying is myself. Because probably George does not agree with all the points, but so that to be clear, one thing is the need that we have to have this conceptualization of social life, and the other level is to know how we try to do this. So from my point of view, as I showed to you, in the foundational ontology Dolce, there is one very relevant class, which is the perdurant class, expressing phenomena happening in time and space, where endurance, people, and so on participate. This is the perdurant. If you take the CIDOC CRM, normally we say that perdurants are temporal entities. But the issue is this true? In my opinion, not, because temporal entities provide properties about time, when the time span is, or about relativity between temporal entities, that this one was before that one. And of course, if you strictly take the CIDOC CRM, the substance of the temporal entity is the same one as the event. But you can reread, reinterpret it, and say, okay, strictly speaking, if you give a look to the properties, time, space, and participants in the CRM, what you see on the slide is connected with the properties participate in, affects, and so on, only at the level of event. So the perdurant is the event, strictly speaking. If you apply the normal consideration that a class is not only defined by the intention, but also of the properties defined by for this class. So we can, on the one side, have the period and the event, and these are the classical CRM temporal entities, events, things, phenomena happening in time. But we can add social situations which are the things seen in collective intentionality, and these are also phenomena, of course, but are not phenomena in the geographical space. These are phenomena in the social space, and there are many social spaces. So, in Lyon, we are trying to do this with adding specific classes in a specific additional namespace, which we call historical data management interoperability. This is one thing. And if you take this, you can imagine things, and I will not comment this slide because I will move on to more formal aspects. But the basic here is to imagine that social collectives, be this the whole society, portion of it, small groups, social collectives, share skills and representation, social representations. If we take all the standard conceptualization of social life from social sciences, from sociology and social psychology, of course, we must be aware there are a lot of discussions about defining all these things, so we must be careful. But generally speaking, we can say that people sharing social representations belong to something which is not a group because they do not act together, but they share something that goes beyond the individual thinking. The individual thinking is the individual realization, of course, of the socialization, because every one of us thinks in a language, had parents, and lives in the world, but the social representations that we have, to use this term coming from French sociology, social representation produce social collectives. And these live in periods. The periods in the CRM are the expression of social collectives, cultural phenomena, and all the rest, in my opinion. This is my point of view, yes? You can think all this, okay, but not the content is relevant now, but where to do it and how to do it. So as George said, if you stay just in your project and alone in your house and so on, you do not produce ontologies. He didn't say this, but George presented this vision that we try to realize together, which is sharing conceptualization for research in humanities. We started from the point of view of historians. We call that data for history, but this is a more general issue. How to produce conceptualizations suitable for applying the FAIR data to research data in humanities. And for this, we try to develop in Lyon an ontology management tool, which we called Ontology Management Environment, OntoMe. Thank you, Wolfgang. The link is in the chat. And the idea is, let's take the CRM as the core ontology, knowing that has a focus, that it has a domain. It's a conceptualization of a specific domain of discourse. Then you had to add an extension, be this the HIST extension or the social extension. This depends on your focus, on your domain. As you know, for excavation, archaeological excavation, we already have an extension, which is devoted to modeling, in specifically the Harris matrix and the way you model data out of historic archaeological excavations. And these are all high-level extensions that try to take a perspective which is generally acceptable in the community, in reference to existing conceptualizations that are not yet modeled. Then you have a level which is the level of the projects. And in the projects, you are nearer to your domain. You need more fine-grained classes that you will implement in your information system. So there must be a dialogue there between the project's ontology level and the generic level, be this the one of CRM for one domain and the complementary one, and so on. And this we try to realize in OntoMe. For instance, strictly speaking, from the perspective of CRM, we know that a ship is a man-made object. But if you propose to people in a project to work with man-made objects, and they have ships, car, tools, and flags, and any kind of objects, of course you can tell me you can use control vocabulary and so on. But on the one side, it's very confusing, and on the other side, the ship has specific properties, which of course can be interpreted as sub-properties of activity properties or what else. But in the project, you need to have ships and voyages and the relationship between them. And if I do this in my project, and another project does the same in a dialect locally, but not sharing this, how can you reach the interoperability? Of course, at the higher level, everything is an activity, wonderful, but the semantic specificity in the domain is lost. So the good idea that I think we should have is to use a tool that allows you to have your own class at your own conceptualization level and specification level, and directly provide the connection using the tools that semantic engineering provides to us to connect the ships to the man-made objects. And this is the vision of OntoMe. And you have different use cases, of course. One use case is the use case of a research project in 10 years, having all a big bunch of classes and models and domain models already specified, yes, in 10 years in OntoMe, and then going on the market and taking the classes and the properties they need in that project. They are already there, they are understandable, there is a community around this, and they take what they're interested in, no headache for modeling, use them in the projects. This comes out of an API. You define your application profile in OntoMe. The OntoMe sends to an API the classes and properties at the whole definition, and then you take any kind of semantic information management tool and use this, consume these classes and produce your instances. And I'm trying to do this on my side. This is one of the possible applications with an application developed by a startup in Basel, which is called GeoHistory. But in the middle run, you should also be able to use Visky for doing this, or Research Space, or whatever you would like to use. The second use case is some classes you're interested in are still missing. So you need to produce them, to add them, and you can consistently do this in 10 years, or 5 years, or 2 years, or already now, in fact, but without control, just your intellectual control, but in 10 years with control from the application. You can do this in OntoMe and directly produce ships, if they do not exist, and connect them to physical man-made objects. And then you can inspect what you've done. And the blue classes are your own classes in your namespace, and the other classes are the classes of the parent ontologies. And then you are semantic expert, and you can analyze this and see the properties that you have and check if they are correct or not, and so on and so forth. And then not only this, but you have a community of experts and giving a look to what you've done, and you can ask them, and you can send a mail to a mailing list, and so on and so forth. And so they validate what you're trying to do. So, and this is what we try in this vision to propose in the domain of history, but more largely, as I showed you, this can be more largely the domain of humanities, with this vision that I will shortly present in the end of my talk. In the middle, you have the repositories of the projects, the national infrastructures where you have the data and so on, the virtual research environments, and you see also the SYMOGIH one, which is there on the left. At the bottom, you have on the right the merging, interlinking the entities, the instances. This is the whole world of interlinking resources, or at least interlinking cards that you have in your information systems about resources using authority files. And on the top, you have a place where you can interlink your models and your conceptualizations. And if you have these both levels together, the interlinking of the language, of the model, of the conceptualization, and the interlinking of the entities, of the instances that you produced, then you can integrate data in the whole word graph vision, information vision, because I'm speaking, as I told you, just about factual information here, not excluding the rest, of course. And you can provide data lakes with a huge amounts of information. This is on the left at the bottom, or have federated queries over all the endpoints of these data silos. And then do research with this. Yes, then you have your own questions, you know what information you have there, and then as a researcher, skilled in data analysis and so on, you're very happy because you do not have to produce once again and once again and once the same information. We can move on in humanities and build on the shoulders of the giants, as we said, also in the sense of shared data. So this is our vision. I hope it was clear and enough that you can take the one or other interest points, and I thank you very much for listening to the talk.